to Season 1, Episode 2 of Quad Pod, the football fanzine-related podcast linked to Exeter City, the Exeter City Supporters Trust in terms of an independent view of its goings-on and, obviously, world football. By the time you read this, I'm going to say, listen to this, I'm going to say Happy New Year. I hope your holiday was absolutely fantabulous. The team here had a great time. We'd also like to just say thank you for the amount of downloads we've had so far from the podcast community. We're truly humbled by the amount of downloads. Excuse me. We'd also like to thank Luke from Certain Talks for coming on the show. He gave an insight into being a YouTuber and Nottingham Forest. We'd also like to say thank you to City Mick, who on last speaking to is quite a character, was in the middle of Scotland watching a game, I believe, at Stonehouse Muir Football Ground. I'm sure he'll come on and tell us a little bit about that, but he wanted to have a little bit of a football holiday and get his football fix in Scotland. So that will be an intriguing discussion when we come back to him. This show also would like to thank Alan Tongue for coming on the show. He did an absolutely fascinating interview about his time at Man United, his playing time of only about 24 games at Exeter, his insight into his spinal injuries, which stopped him from playing football, and also the mental health aspects of that. He now is a learned university lecturer at the University of Bolton and has done an incredible job and has written books. So thanks very much. We were going to split this show into 3 parts. This show we're not going to because there's no trust meeting until we come back. So we're going to have our man in Japan and just a little bit of discussion around it of the trust, and the other surprise guest is going to have a whole show of their own. So keep listening. Remember, it's about being positive about the Exeter City Supporters Trust. Exeter City, sharing our love for general football, being a beautiful game. If you've got any questions, anybody who want to come on the show, please contact us at Twitter and follow us, and feel free to ask questions. Thanks for listening. Over to our man in Japan. Right, welcome back to Season 1, Episode 2 of Quad Pod. This is a really fun one. I'm really looking forward to this because it is our man in Japan. Although he's not in Japan today, I'm going to introduce him in a little while, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to this chap. And he will correct me. He lives in Japan. He's got a YouTube channel, I think they call it these days, called MACTION PLANET. He moved over to Japan to start up I think he just loved Japan, but he ended up starting up a travel company which talks about blossom trails, whiskey, beer, and sports tours, etc. I'll let him explain that. He was a member of the Exeter City almost unbeaten Internet WorldNet team that went up to Leeds to Leeds to play many games against many other fairly drunken, I would say, football supporters at the time. We connected because he lived in the home counties and we started to go to games together. He saw his first game in 5 years, and I caught up with him, which was a Boxing Day game in Portsmouth. Matt Salmon, how did I do? Can you say hello and welcome in Japanese, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Konnichiwa, minasan.
Go on.
It's a real honor to be here, Al, and really fantastic to talk to you after really too long, actually. And yeah, you've summarized things pretty well. My name is Mack Salmon, and I was born and bred in Exeter, which is why I'm through and through Exeter City fan. In 2002, I went to Japan for the first time for the World Cup, and I followed England around. I actually went to all four of the first. I went to the first four games, the 4 of the 5 games that England ended up playing before getting knocked out by Brazil. The first group games were in Saitama, just north of Tokyo, against Sweden. Then there was the game against Argentina, the famous 1-0, the Beckham penalty. Then down to Osaka against Nigeria. And me and my friends, we had those sorts of ticket packs that meant that we had tickets to watch the game that the team that finished second in the group would play. And the assumption was that Argentina would top the group and that we would finish second. But actually, Sweden ended up topping the group. And so we were desperately hoping for a draw against Nigeria for our own benefit so that we could watch that second round game in the city of Niigata. And yeah, a boring 0-0 draw in this appalling heat I don't know how the players survived playing in that, meant that we went on to watch the 3-0 victory against Denmark. So it was my introduction to Japan and my introduction to Japanese culture. And that's basically why I ended up moving there in 2006.
Brilliant. And I think what we'd like to do, excuse me, Quad Pod isn't just all about Exeter City, although it's got connections with it, is actually understanding a little bit about other things. So you obviously watch Japanese football. So what's your football team?
So in Tokyo, my football team is FC Tokyo. The team was founded, or the origins of FC Tokyo date back to 1935. They spent about 87 years or so as the Tokyo Gas, a chant which is still sung actually in honor of our origins. But in 1999, as more money started coming into Japanese football, and you can now connect the timelines, 1999, of course, 3 years before hosting the World Cup, one of the conditions and one of the conditions and one of the consequences of hosting that World Cup in 2002 was, of course, a formation of a more professional Japanese league. And so we've spent the last 23 years as FC Tokyo. We play in a stadium called the Ajinomoto Stadium. Ajinomoto, primarily kind of foodstuffs company, although they dabble in a few other things, and including binders, I think, for COVID vaccines, which has meant that their share price has done very well recently. And we play on the outskirts of Tokyo. Tokyo is kind of an interesting prefecture. So America has 50 states. England, we have got a lot of counties, and Japan has 47 prefectures. And Tokyo is one of those prefectures. It's kind of interesting. The thing that you would normally think of as being central Tokyo, where I live, for example, where that famous crossing is, in Shibuya, the big temples at Sensoji and the big shrine, the Meiji Shrine. Although that's what we think of as the center, it's the heart of Tokyo. It's actually geographically on the east side of the prefecture. And FC Tokyo play in Chofu, which is out west. So I basically head up to Shinjuku, which is the busiest railway station in the world, as certified by the Guinness Book of Records. 3.2 million people go through that station. And then we take a train out about 20 minutes west and get off at a station called Tobitakyu and walk about 10 minutes to the Ajinomoto Stadium, which has a capacity just under 50,000. I think it's 49.
No, I've done a bit of research on stadiums. That's a big stadium because looking at stadiums, the smallest ones were about 15,000.
Yeah.
And that must be one of the biggest stadiums. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that's just a function of the fact that it's, was built to house games in Tokyo. And I mean, it doesn't just house soccer games. For example, in the 2019 Rugby World Cup, it hosted a ton of games as well.
Now, it's interesting you say about World Cups and things, because another thing about Japanese football history, I noted that and I've got to get the dates right here, In 1968, the Japanese football team got a bronze in the Olympics. Is that? Are you aware of that?
Yes, yeah.
Right, I did get that right. And then, like you say, between up until the 80s, it wasn't kicking off, especially. But like you say, in the 90s, it particularly kicked off. Now, I understand that in 1999, that they made a commitment to try and get 100 professional football teams by 2092. How do you think they're getting on with that at the moment?
It's on track. We've seen restructuring of the Japanese football pyramid. So that's worth talking about, actually. You know, Japanese football has a pyramid structure, same as, you know, many other league systems around the world, with promotion and relegation based on performance. And a little bit like the gap between the conference and then the leagues, you know, you have certain criteria for allowing you to enter, you know, subsequent higher leagues. So the kind of what we would consider the top flight, the J League has 3 levels: J1, J2, and J3.
3 levels. Okay.
Yeah. Currently J1 has 18 clubs in it, and J2 has 22 clubs. But from 2024, they're doing what I consider very sensible restructuring. So there's going to be 20 clubs in each of those two, and then 20 clubs in J3. Okay. And then below that, we have a 4th level, which is 16 clubs of Japan Football League. And then we have 2 other levels of about 9 regional leagues. And then below that, what you might consider, say, level 7 and below of the pyramid, you've got prefectural leagues. So remember, I mentioned those 47 prefectures. Yeah. So,
and of those clubs, because obviously this podcast is a little bit centered around about the ownership of football clubs and stuff. Predominantly, how are they funded? You've alluded to the fact there are certain conditions. What are they roughly?
Sure. So what you'll find with a lot of these clubs is that they've got a mixed shareholding based on a consortia of different companies. So big connections between, you know, corporate and corporations rather, and then professional sport in Japan. Almost akin to the kind of franchise structure that you see in the US.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So with baseball, for example, in Japan, which is the most popular sport in Japan, actually, not football and not sumo, as some people think, then, you know, each of these teams pretty much has, you know, a very, very clear owner, and that owner is in the name of the club as well. Like the baseball team I support, the Tokyo Yakult Swallows, owned by the Yakult Corporation, famous for their little probiotic drinks that they think you should take one of every morning. So within football, you often have, for example, FC Tokyo. You know, the formation of FC Tokyo in 1999 involved a number of interests coming together, you know, and taking a shareholding in this business.
And just to on the other side of things, is it tribal? I mean, or what in terms of the club sizes and attendances? How do you these leagues? How do you pitch them? So, like League 1, 2, and 3, what are they getting on average as fans at a game?
Attendances really vary, actually. A lot is driven by just the size of the club, and then how well the club is doing that season. So, you know, I've been to some FC Tokyo games which have been a sellout, and I've been to some FC Tokyo games where only 20% of the stadium has been filled. That's 10,000 people. And, you know, there's over 10 million people live in Tokyo, and 37 million live in the greater Tokyo area. So wow. To be, you know, so it really just varies. In terms of the fan culture that you've alluded to, it's very, very interesting. because it's quite a new, fresh, still relatively professional football structure. The fan culture borrows from a lot of cultures around the world. If you come to watch a game with me at FC Tokyo, for example, we'll be singing songs like in Japanese. We'll be singing songs like "Vamos, Vamos, Tokyo." Throwing in a little bit of Spanish there. And then before the start of every match, we're actually one of the teams around the world that sings "You'll Never Walk Alone."
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's really incredible. On the MACTION Planet YouTube channel, you can see 2 videos where I've just got the camera out and recorded everybody in full voice. The Big Bang style fans, the fans who are into it, as it were, they sit behind the goal as is the case in many football stadia around the world. And everybody in full voice, scarves out, start singing "You'll Never Walk Alone."
I know it's particularly frowned on in English football, but is there things like pyrotechnics and stuff like that, or is it drums and that sort of atmosphere?
Thankfully, I would say there's no fireworks. That would be very, very frowned upon. But there are chant starters there, with drums and a few trumpets and whatnot.
Do they do megaphones like they do in France and places, or you don't see that so much?
There's sometimes one guy who's kind of directing all of the singing. So that's something about Japanese fan culture that's that you do find in some other football cultures as well. Where I would say that in England, although there is a core, we still have them. I noticed that ECFC are kind of chant starters. We were there back in the day, Al, in that group.
Yes,
it's also very organic. I felt a little bit that had changed. We can come on to talk about that later. But when we were watching in the cowshed at Exeter City, there was that feeling that really anybody could start a chant any time, as long as you could get the 5 people around you to join in, and then the 10 people and so on, right? In Japan, the cheering is very, very organized. You find this at baseball and you find this at football as well. So, there'll be the chant starters and the core group of people who will direct all of the singing. The other thing that is very interesting is, in English football, I find that the chanting is very dependent on the direction of the game and very much responds to the game.
Yeah.
We would be singing some chant about our relationship with our friendly rivals, Plymouth Argyle, for example. But then as the ball entered into, the half that we're attacking and then closer to the goal, that chant would just organically stop and everybody would just start cheering, come on, or whatever,
Yeah.
And that actually helps, because if you're there just talking to your mates, for example, the way the crowd are reacting helps whether you should now turn your eyes onto the game.
Yeah.
In Japan, you can't rely on the crowd to do that. There's just a wall of noise. I've just been often enjoying a beer in the stands. Again, a difference with England.
Beer in the stands, that could catch on in the UK.
I can hear in your voice that you're thinking, let's go, let's come over to Japan and enjoy a few games. So yes, we do not have this line of sight of the pitch. So you can, there are actually beer persona with a keg on their back who will come round and pour you a draft beer.
Really?
At your seat.
I think that could take off on the Big Bang. I can see that now. 2 or 3 people with kegs on their back serving people. I think that go down really well. So there are some slight nuances. Going back to something else that really confused me a little bit. Well, we talk about the J League, right? How does the A League work? Then the connections with the A League, is it the East Asia league which links into the club series with a bit of Hong Kong in there? Or have I misunderstood that? And apparently there's an Emperor's Cup. Yeah, is that
yeah. So yeah, there are tournaments just like we have there are equivalents of the League Cup and equivalents of the FA Cup in Japan.
So is the Emperor's Cup a sort of like a League Cup, FA Cup type thing? The Emperor's Cup, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So that's all like it's a Pan Japan, tournament where theoretically, like the FA Cup, any team can win it. They first started that tournament in 1921, so it's of the club tournaments, the cup tournaments. It's the one that has the longest history, and the guys who win that qualify for the Asian Champions League series. So that's maybe where you're thinking of, just like in football in Europe, there are now very complicated qualification rules for who gets to play.
Countries does that cover? Because that's where I was sort of alluding to, because I did a bit of research and I didn't quite understand it. So in effect, do Japanese clubs go to other countries in Asia and they play in another cup? Is that right?
Yeah, so there's basically it's very simple. You just think of it as the equivalent of a Champions League.
Right. Okay.
And they are, what is going to happen though is that they're going to reform the format. So there are new plans potentially to limit the number of teams. And again, this is parallels what has happened in Europe, since the early 90s, right? And then the transformation of the Champions League. So they want to shift it to 24 teams, split it into a more regional format, so East and West, and then again changing the structure, like home and away games, and then moving into a knockout stage. So we'll see.
And with that was one of my questions, because we'll talk about money in a little while, but the travel distances, right? What are the travel distances? What's the two longest distances? Like Plymouth, Newcastle. What does it look like? And how do people travel? Do they travel by bullet train or coach, or
Yeah, it would be unfeasible to go on some of these journeys, any other way. We have teams up in Hokkaido. So, for example, in League One, you've got the team Consadole Sapporo, who play, although they're based primarily in Sapporo, they do actually play all around the prefecture. That's something that you find as well in Japanese football, where some teams will have a very, very dedicated home base. Other teams, in order to spread the love and share the love, around some big geographic areas, will actually, maybe be based in a certain city, but actually play home all around, the prefecture. Like, imagine that if we had, there is only one team in Devon, but metaphorically, but if there really was only one team in Devon, then it may be that Exeter played half their home games in Exeter, but then we would play some games in Torquay, some games in Plymouth, but also some games in Barnstaple, some games on Dartmoor, just to spread the love and build up a fan base, build up that interest, sell a little bit of merchandise, and really help people feel that, they were part of, a more Devonshire style club, right? So you draw that parallel across to Japan.
So there's not so much of an identity with like St James's Park football ground, or
it depends. Again, it depends on the team. So if you're Kawasaki Frontale, some of the bigger clubs, Kashiwa Reysol, you're going to be very much associated with that town and that club. But then in some of the places where there aren't a lot of teams around that area, then they very much represent, perhaps a part of the prefecture or the the overall prefecture itself, as much as the town that they may be named after. So to go back to, geographically, you've got teams up in Hokkaido, and then you've got teams all the way down in, Okinawa even. You've got teams in Kyushu. So you're traveling the length and breadth of the country. So it's going to be flying in some cases. It is an island nation, and where you can get there by bullet train, you'll be traveling by bullet train. There's kind of, the bullet train now going southwest out of Tokyo. You can go pretty continuously all the way to a city called Fukuoka, which is in Kyushu, one of the 4 main islands of Japan. And then from there now connect to other bullet trains. But the way I always see it is, if I'm going to Hiroshima, which is about 3 hours and 45 minutes by bullet train, then that's worth taking the train to. Anything further than that, and I'm going to be flying.
You're going to be flying.
That's going to be more.
And do they get that culture? Because I know that I'm a regular home and away fan, and it's we've got the motorway system, and in theory you can get to most places within a few hours drive or go on a train. Does that sort of operate in Japan, or logistically it's not really so practical? Or do you get like students going in for an away game when it's in their university city, as an example?
Yeah, I think if people have grown up, it's great to see. It's a very family culture. Actually, you've touched on something interesting. I'll just talk about for a second. You get a lot of people go to football by themselves, actually, in Japan.
Well, okay.
They may be part of a group or whatnot, but they're basically, solo fans who are going to enjoy the game and the atmosphere. Luckily, you get a crowd which shows great diversity in ages as well, and a lot of men and a lot of women and a lot of kids enjoying games as well. So those kids grow up and they still show some support for the team, then they might be able to make it to travel around the country. But the cost of a return bullet train ticket to Kyoto is about 27,000 yen, which is current exchange rates about 150, 160 quid or so. So,
wow.
Once you start factoring in the bullet trains, then actually travel does get quite expensive. So perhaps you might choose to visit the teams that you can get to by more local trains in the greater Tokyo area.
Yes, of course. Which brings me very nicely onto Japanese football finance, and you've touched on the exchange rate there of 27,000 yen, about £150, 160. So 1.5 billion yen, which is one of the prize monies for one of the cups. How much is that roughly? Excuse me. Roughly. Are we talking 200 million, 50 million? I'll let you work it out. So I've asked you a serious calculation there. I apologize.
The problem that we've got at the moment is that the exchange rate is very volatile.
Right.
And also, so what was it again? 1.5 billion.
1.5 billion. So it's quite difficult to calculate because of the exchange rate, yeah? It seems like a whole load of money.
Yeah, 1.5 billion yen. Yeah, it's a huge amount of money. It would be probably at the moment about like just under 10 million quid.
Well, okay. So that's lower than the Premier League then. Sorry, I know that took a bit of calculation, so I didn't mean to put you on the spot. No. So that's interesting. So you can win about 10 million to win one of the cups. I'm just like putting that close to winning the FA Cup, for example. So it seems that and I mean, the TV deals are probably slightly more than that, I guess. So it's not quite as much money floating around in Japanese football by the looks of it. Would that be a fair comment?
Oh, well, I mean, without a doubt, absolutely. I mean, it's not even the biggest sport in the country, right? Baseball is. So there's absolutely you know, it's still very much a Japan league, right? I mean, when you look at the Premiership, I think is maybe the best example of an international league, essentially, rather like the FTSE. There's very few companies in the FTSE 100 index that are actually domiciled in the UK, right? It's like the world index. Similarly, the Premier League is a world league with players from all over the world. Look at the club sponsorships on shirts now in the Premiership, right? I mean, companies from all over the planet with sponsorship on the billboards at the stadia, directed very much at fans who are going to be watching in countries like Malaysia or Singapore, as much as people who are going to be watching in cities like Newcastle and London. So in Japan, the sponsorship is very domestic driven. There's not an assumption that really anybody would be very interested in Japanese football outside Japan. Now, having said that, I've recently had some conversations with FC Tokyo about the fact that they want to change that. Japan is always very ambitious. We've seen continual success of the Japanese national teams. At the World Cup, in this last World Cup, of course, they had classic, memorable, giant-killing victories against Germany and Spain. And what they want is to translate that international attention into international attention on the J League, so that then leads to more international players and managers wanting to come, and a general elevation of the standard of Japanese football. So it's very, very interesting that I think we're going to see over the next 10 years, a transition from quite an insular Japanese league. That's not to say there aren't foreign players or managers, but I just mean in terms of the interest in it and its focus. There's going to be a lot of outreach, a lot of kind of twinning programs, and a desire to try to basically elevate interest in clubs like FC Tokyo and Urawa Reds.
Maybe you could use the Brazil connection of Exeter City of 1914 and suggest a friendly with FC Tokyo, and I'll happily come over and watch and drink beer in the stadium. It sounds perfect to me.
I absolutely love the fact that Exeter have this, we're punched above our weight in terms of some of our historic impact, and also some of the people that have been associated with the club. It's kind of bizarre. We're the first team that the Brazil national side ever played. In the last 30 years, we've had people like Freddie Starr, Yuri Geller, Michael Jackson associated with the club, for better or worse. We've had a lot of England, ex-England players, associated with the club. We held Man United to a 0-0 draw at Old Trafford, considered one of the top 5 0-0 draws in human history, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so even though I'm on the other side of the world for 16 years now, I'm still very proud to be connected to Exeter City and everything that has happened in that time, and to be a fan-owned team.
And just on that, I know that you were coming back and we saw each other, and you've hit on the things about family orientated clubs. I personally think you've probably seen quite a few changes about Exeter the match day. So, for example, it was a full house the day you came. I think it is selling out quite a lot now, and I don't think that was the case 6-7 years ago when you were over. So, what are the things that really stand out for you at the moment?
I have great affection for the period when I started following Exeter City. My first game at St James's Park was actually in 1993, the 27th of February versus Swansea, a 2-0 loss. But that didn't put me off. watching the Grecians. It was really the fan atmosphere that I was fascinated with. Even though I think we all have to admit there were times when it wasn't as pleasant as perhaps it is now to go to a game in a number of ways. My first away game, would you believe, Al, was away at Home Park against Plymouth Argyle, the famous 3-0 victory on the 10th of April, 1993.
Nice. I was there, obviously. Yeah.
And then things went from, well, you know, how to say, I was going to say bad to bad. I mean, on the 8th of January, 1994, we played Aston Villa and we lost 1-0. Yes. That was a sellout game, and the capacity of the ground at that time was 10,570, a number that is ingrained in my head as the official capacity of that day. And then, of course, the final game of the 94-95 season against Northampton, it was very possible that would be the last game ever for the club that we remember. So, you know, that period was a tumultuous time for the club. And it was also, I know the match experience was interesting. So changes that are obvious is now, of course, the facilities at St. James's Park are absolutely fantastic relative to where they were. The food is of higher quality. The ability to get a beer, you know, just outside the ground and have a drink and mingle and enjoy a real pre-match atmosphere in the ambiance of the ground is great. You know, the mascot coming around doing a little bit of entertainment with the fans who are mingled. The level of merchandising is off the charts compared to that time. And I think the feeling of community and fan ownership that the trust has been able to generate has extended far beyond, you know, people who are, you know, maybe the core support to, you know, to encompass people who back in the day, you know, would think, oh, should I go to a game? Should I not? And that was very much dependent on how the team were performing. Remember, in the early 90s, we were not performing so well. And so we've now managed to extend beyond that core support, bring in turn those fair weather fans into, you know, to core supporters, and then to just reach further and further outwards, and to make the match experience more pleasant for everybody. Also, I think the influence of the success of the Exeter Chiefs Rugby Club. Actually, I think you see that, because I think that where in the early 90s, you know, the Chiefs were really nowhere, and if you wanted to watch any kind of sport in Exeter, ECFC were the only game in town. Now, people have a number of choices about how to deploy their funds, and tickets are not cheap. It's not quite quid a kid anymore like it was, you know, 1994. But yeah, 20 quid to stand on the big bank for a game. I think that if you're looking, you know, to how to spend your sporting money, the Chiefs provide big competition, and I think that's forced ECFC to improve the match experience to try to compete with that.
No, and it's interesting you say that. You may or may not be aware that sometimes they even have matches on the same day. So actually, you could be looking at, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, 14 to 15,000 people watching live sport probably on a match day, and it has had some impacts, but conversely, it's actually, like you say, created competition, and you know, both of them have. You won't believe this now. The new Princess A in Exeter, which is probably fairly new to you, they both got mobile merchandise machines out at Christmas. And what's really clear, and I'm delighted that you've come on this show and actually said so many of the positives, because this is what this show is about. Well, at the same time, trying to just like focus people into the right areas, which is one of the motivations of the show also. But I think you've hit on great food. I mean, the food is a local company. I don't know whether you know that. Did you pick up on that? It's
Yeah.
a local food company outside the stadium. The events, it's all been expanded. I think it could still do a lot more. Personally, I think, particularly after the game. So
yes, I completely agree with that. There's definitely a market of people who maybe don't want to just go straight home, right? And whether you can capture their attention and part of their wallet share for, an hour or two after the game, I think we've got to work on that a little bit.
And in terms of away games, you've probably not seen it, but let's shout it from the rooftops. If I was to say to you that I don't know whether you picked up the Saturday before Christmas away at Bolton, we had 950 supporters travelled 4 or 5 hours to go and watch the team. Now, I think in our time in the early 90s, that would have been pretty unheard of.
Yeah, well, me and you were travelling around together from basically 2000 to 2006, watching games together. And yeah, I mean, how many of us went up to Scunthorpe in 2001? I don't know, 100 maybe. And probably a lot of them actually from, like us, outside of Exeter, coming up from the home counties way. So yeah, when I'm following some of these away numbers, and they're absolutely incredible. They're bigger than some of the home attendances we used to get on a Tuesday night against Barnet back in 1993 and 1994.
Yeah, we should never forget those days. And I don't know. Well, you have picked up on, because when you came back and you wanted to get a ticket and you approached me, you were probably quite surprised to find out that there's now marketplaces to, share tickets between fans to make sure that fans do get to games, because it's becoming increasingly difficult to get into the stadium. So that was probably unheard of in your 90s experience, should I say?
Yeah, I mean, it took a Premiership club coming down to sell out the ground. It was just people. There was little interest. I think we, before the renovation of St James's Park and the selling of some of the land, I don't think the city council were very interested in the club.
Yeah, maybe.
Less interested. I think it's fair. I think that's a fact. Less interested for sure. We can argue about the nuances of exactly that. So it's just that the transformation has been absolutely incredible. And I think, I'm very proud to be sat on the other side of the world looking at a non-profit democratic organization that has the majority shareholding in my hometown team. It's absolutely fantastic. And I know what is even better, and I think this needs to be shouted from the rooftops, is not only that the fans own the club, allowing people to have something to do on a Tuesday and a Saturday, right? But the fact that Exeter have been successful under the tenor of the ownership by the trust. I mean, right, what was it, 2 years ago? So in 2020, Matt Taylor, the gaffer, he requested a playing budget of about 1.75 million. And I think the trust came in and offered about £500,000 to cover the following 3 years, which Matt could spend, as he desired. And he couldn't believe it. And this is real money we're talking about, sizable sums coming in as a result of fan management. It's incredible.
I'm going to put you on the spot now, right? Just a bit of fun, because this show's been incredible, by the way. Just talking to you, it's just brilliant hearing things. But the transfer window, you've only seen us for one game. Sorry, that's unfair, because I know you watch online. I apologise. Right, I'll reset that question. Who are the players you've really enjoyed seeing this season? Where do you think we need to strengthen? If you were going to give Gary a little bit of money, where would you put it from what you've seen?
That's a very, very, that's a very, very good question. I mean, obviously, the absolute legend, Sam Nombe, is an absolute legend.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Blackman was in goal. I think he's devastatingly good. I think he's I think he's insane. I would like to see, and it's difficult whether that needs to involve transfers or whether that maybe needs to involve a managerial shift or whether that just needs to involve, trying to motivate the players a little bit. But I feel that central midfield could, some of the playmaking, I would like to see a little bit more imagination in that. And like I said, whether that comes through fresh blood or whether that comes through just a change in strategy, I'm not sure. But
and it's interesting because I'll give you a bit of feedback because I'm a little bit closer to it, right? We have the age-old problem. We've got I don't know whether you've picked up the amount of academy players in the team, but we're in the situation now where we need to offer those guys some really good contracts because we're competing in League One and we're excuse me. So talking about our central midfield, we've probably got players on anywhere between £2,000 and £4,000 a week competing against players that are on £18,000 a week at clubs in a similar position. So I don't think we'll ever forget where we've come from or what we are, right? But that does create a bit of a paradigm for the the fans, owners, and I think what we're probably going to see is maybe lose a couple of players, and then it's like it's all about cycles. The other challenges you've talked about, you pinpointed a legend there. He's at a stage in his career where he could probably go a lot higher. So, and it's difficult, and it's will always be the forever struggle, I think, of Exeter City, but we enjoy that, don't we? It's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and it can have some benefits. I mean, look, Ollie Watkins is a great example of how that can have some good knock on. I mean, he had a little bit of a fall from grace, part of his later career decisions, but let's not forget Martin Buster Phillips and possibly the first of the homegrown transfers, to then get a huge cash injection into the club. So it can happen. You are right. It's going to be part of the perennial problem, though, as a club and as we grow. And so money is always going to be a huge part of English football. And we're going to have to, I think that's the next stage of maturity for the club ownership, is to say, okay, I think we're in that transition point. I think that the numbers that I quoted earlier in terms of, say, supporting the players' budget are huge, but it's a business. So yes, there's two aspects to the trust for me. There's the lovey-dovey, fan-owned stuff, which is great, and it's great whether you're in the conference or whether you're in the Premiership, right? But the difference between being in those two positions, and we're in the middle of that, is then how can that ownership really translate into good business sense? Getting in the right sponsors, maximizing match day revenue, maximizing merchandising revenue, a sensible deployment of the funds, good fiscal management. Once you have all that money in place, it seems like the trust is able to do that. The question, I think, for the next 5 years is how we can scale that up. I mean, we're in 10th at the moment in the league as of time of recording, which is at the start of the year 2023. We're 6 points off 6th place. Now, I think we should be targeting a little bit higher than that. With half a season to go, we can still easily make the playoffs. And if we get promoted, then we're in the big boys now. We're in the championship. So it's a different story. I've always been ambitious. Nothing I'd love to see in my lifetime, Exeter City in the top flight at some point, and I don't think it's impossible to happen. When I turn on the TV now and I'm seeing games involving AFC Bournemouth, a game that, games that we saw home, and I've been away there as well. One of my earliest away games. It's good to see, and I think it shows that the dream can happen. And I think it would be incredible if Exeter could show that it can happen without necessarily having a big single owner, typically, I guess, from overseas, injecting cash into it. If we can do it as a trust club, I think that would be such not just great for Exeter, but I think it'll be great for English football.
I think you're right, I think it would make a good Spielberg movie, personally, especially with Jay Stansfield coming back, and obviously I know that you saw his father play and all that. There's so and the branding of being a community ethos organisation just cannot be undervalued, and that's probably one thing I think we perhaps don't see in front of our face sometimes, is the opportunity that's there. So I'm glad you said that. Now, Mack, we're almost out of time. I'm going to say, firstly, from me personally to a friend, thank you very much for coming on. Right, I think it's great that somebody came on with a neon DJ light and behind him wearing a Transformers sweatshirt top. You have never changed. Please don't change. For anybody that is really interested in going to Japan, right, MACTION PLANET, it'll look after you. Matt will do you brilliant. Look at his YouTube channel. It is full of so much stuff, from whiskey trails to Mario Karts to is it Yamen noodles? Yamen.
Ramen noodles.
Sorry, ramen noodles. Oh yes, and I know that you work with celebrity chefs and all that sort of stuff. Look, and I believe that you're just about to leave, because you're actually in London. You're just about to go to the darts tonight. Is that right?
Yeah, one of my other passions is the darts. I absolutely love watching it on TV, and the times I've been able to go, I've been able to be there. And allow me to share a story here, Al. I went to the quarterfinals and the final of the 2005 Lakeside, the BDO World Championships.
Yeah.
So you say, well, Mack, why didn't you go to the semis? Well, we all know why. Because I was at Old Trafford that day.
Were you?
Watching a 0-0 draw between Manchester United and Exeter City. Yeah. And I had spoken to the cameraman who was on the table that we had managed to get around the side of the stage, and told him I was going up. And he said, oh, on Sunday, if you wear your shirt, I will get you on camera. So I did. And I had my scarf, and he filmed me waving my scarf at the camera. And that was all fine. And then a friend had recorded it. So I was able to watch the recording. And the Tony Green had commentated on top of me. Oh, there's a proud man. 0-0. What a result. And right, he went on to say, and he'll be, I'm sure he'll be excited about going to the replay at Newcastle next week. And what you can see what he had done, right? He had seen St. James Park, and he had gone, he had got confused in his head, and he had just said Newcastle instinctively. And that was that. And then the next week we played Forest Green Rovers. In the what was it, FA Trophy, I think. And there was a reporter from the Times there, and he said, he recognized me. Oh, you were the guy. He was a Torquay fan, actually, this reporter. He said, you were the guy on the darts. And then he interviewed me a little bit, and then he mentioned me in that Times article. So it had a nice little knock-on effect.
Brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And just to share, I've got a little experience for that day. I remember I watched the Man United game. I must have looked at my phone about 250 times because my wife was potentially giving birth at any moment, and I was just waiting to see whether I was going to get a taxi back to home, but I wasn't going to miss that game for anything. Matt, great story. You're going to have to come on again at some point in the future, and talk about the J League and talk about. Sorry, one final question. Any English guys, Scots guys playing? We didn't answer that question. Probably limited, I guess.
Yeah, it's not actually. I mean, of course, we had Gary Lineker back in the day.
Of course.
Remember playing for playing for Grampus 8.
Yeah. Arsene
That
Wenger.
was maybe the most famous one. Jay Bothroyd was most recently at Jubilo Iwata and Consadole Sapporo. He comes to mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not one where we have, many, it's not a dominant presence in terms of the foreigners coming into the J League. Unfortunately, England is not one. So if any English players, I know it sounds terrible to say this, but maybe players who, maybe in the back end of their career or looking to transition down, from say Prem or Championship, instead of going into League One or League Two, I think a lateral move to have a couple of seasons in Japan could be an interesting experience for them. I mean, that's something I think is great about sport, that it allows you those kind of opportunities. And I'd love to see a more English and Scottish players making their way to Japan.
What a lovely thought. Matt, sorry, I've thrown so many questions out. You've been absolutely patient with me. Next part of the show, we've got another great interview, but you've been stunning. Matt, thanks for your time. And don't forget, everybody, MACTION Planet YouTube at QuadPod. Cheers. Take care. Look after yourself.
Cheers. Kanpai.
Last part of the show, I think we'll all agree that Mack from Japan, absolutely fascinating individual, and he is a massive fan of Exeter City, and it's great to see his insight from somebody who's not been around the club for a period of time, particularly because of COVID and other reasons. And I'm sure that we'll have him back on the show. Right. I talked about the trust. City Mix on his sabbaticals and holidays. He will come back. There is a meeting in 2 weeks, so we've dropped this podcast in ahead of schedule, and we knew that we wouldn't be in line with the meeting. The interesting bit about that meeting is that I believe there's going to be an election to the board of Exeter City of a new nominated elected trustee from the trust. So that will be an interesting person to understand who had done that. The reason for that is because we've had a lady step down, Elaine Davis, who'd been on the board and a part of the trust board for I think 9 years, and she's done an incredible job, and it'll be great to see somebody carry on the great work that she's done. So that'll be an interesting thing, and I believe there'll be discussions related to retail and online merchandise. So slightly shorter show. We're going to keep them under an hour moving forward. Any questions, please drop them on our @QuadPod Twitter. If you've got any ideas for people to come on the show, we'll put them in and we'll book them in. And if you've got any questions for us, then please put them on @QuadPod. Thank you very much for listening, and Happy New Year 2023. Make sure it's a good one.